Have you ever tried to control everything, every detail, every outcome, only to feel life slipping further from your grasp? The more you push, the more chaos seems to rise. Your thoughts loop, your chest tightens, and it's as if your mind is caught in its own gravity. But then something unexpected happens. The moment you finally release that invisible grip, your body softens, your focus sharpens, and the world seems to rearrange itself around your calm. Why does letting go change everything? What if the shift you feel isn't coincidence, but a real quantum movement inside your consciousness? It begins almost invisibly. You tighten your shoulders, your breath shortens, and somewhere behind your eyes, a silent command takes over. I need to fix this. I need to make it go my way. It feels responsible, even noble, as if control could protect you from uncertainty. Yet what's actually happening beneath that surge of willpower is a microscopic chain reaction in your brain. The prefrontal cortex starts firing excessively, analysis spirals into loops, and thought becomes noise disguised as clarity. You know this moment. It's the one where you replay a conversation until 3 a.m., rewriting each sentence as if control could alter the past, or when you map every possible outcome of a future event until the mind, overwhelmed, collapses into exhaustion. This is the hidden danger. Control isn't precision, it's pressure. The very neural network that helps you make decisions turns against you when it's overactivated. Psychologists call it analysis paralysis. Neurologically, it's the prefrontal cortex caught in overdrive, unable to release tasks to other networks that handle intuition, creativity, and insight. In that state, the brain's energy consumption spikes. You burn glucose faster. Your body interprets mental tension as physical threat, and cortisol quietly begins to rise. You feel alert, but you're actually narrowing your perceptual field. It's a subtle self-trap. The more you try to manage reality, the smaller your access to it becomes. Control feels safe because it gives you the illusion of certainty, yet the very act of forcing outcomes fragments the mind. Imagine a conductor trying to direct every musician's movement, every bow, every breath, instead of letting the orchestra follow its internal rhythm. The result isn't harmony, it's dissonance. The same happens internally. When you over-control, your mental orchestra, attention, emotion, sensory input, and intuition, loses synchronization. Thoughts start colliding. Focus tightens around problems instead of possibilities. You can almost hear the static in your head, that faint buzz that comes when awareness shrinks to the narrow tunnel of fear and prediction. There's a deeper irony in this. The quantum field of consciousness, not in the mystical sense, but as a living metaphor for how perception and energy distribute, thrives on flexibility. Systems in coherence adapt, systems under stress collapse. When you're tense, your neural coherence drops, brain waves become erratic, communication between hemispheres weakens, and what you call reality becomes filtered through noise. This is why when you're forcing things, even small obstacles feel unbearable. The world doesn't actually get harder. Your perceptual bandwidth just contracts. You start missing subtle signals, body cues, relational nuances, creative impulses that were available a moment before. Control, instead of protecting you, blinds you. And here's the paradox most people never notice. The more you insist on control, the more chaotic your internal state becomes. What feels like order on the outside is entropy within. The mechanism is simple and brutal. Every micro-decision you obsess over increases local brain entropy, scattering focus across too many competing circuits. It's like trying to hold water with a clenched fist. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it escapes. But this isn't a moral failure. It's biology. It's what happens when consciousness identifies with the executive function, the "I must manage everything" voice, instead of the observing awareness behind it. The human brain wasn't designed for constant steering. It was designed for adaptive flow. Control freezes flow, and when flow freezes, life starts feeling mechanical, repetitive, dry. If you trace the sensation of control inward, you'll often find something softer beneath it. Fear. Not fear of failure, but fear of surrendering the illusion of agency. We confuse letting go with losing power when in fact, control is what drains it. The nervous system, under continuous vigilance, consumes attention like a fire consumes oxygen. And yet, something remarkable happens the moment you begin to release that grip. A physiological event, not just a psychological one. Neural activity redistributes. The default mode network begins to quiet. Energy moves from the frontal lobes to the sensory and emotional centers, restoring coherence. The system starts to self-correct. That, however, is only the beginning. Because what truly transforms your consciousness isn't just the relief of stopping the struggle. It's what reorganizes after that pause. There's a second, deeper shift that few ever notice, and it happens the moment your brain stops fighting itself. And that's where the real mystery begins, in what the mind becomes capable of once control releases its hold. There's a precise instant, so quick it almost escapes notice, when the mind stops gripping reality and something inside begins to unclench. It feels like a breath you didn't realize you were holding finally releasing itself. But beneath that subtle sensation lies a profound neurological event, one that reconfigures how your consciousness operates. Letting go isn't a vague act of faith or resignation. It's a measurable shift in brain function. When you finally stop forcing outcomes, your prefrontal cortex, that front seat of control and prediction, reduces its activity. It's not shutting down, it's rebalancing. The neural circuits responsible for hypervigilance begin to quiet, allowing other regions to communicate more freely. Blood flow redistributes toward the sensory and associative areas, the very networks that make intuition and creativity possible. In that moment, your default mode network, the cluster of regions that keeps your sense of self running in the background, starts to reorganize. Under stress, this network loops obsessively around me, my plans, my problems, my image, my control. When you let go, those self-referential loops dissolve and connectivity expands outward. You begin to perceive without the interference of constant self-monitoring. Awareness stops orbiting around the ego's gravity and starts floating freely again. It's not mystical, it's structural. MRI studies show that when subjects practice non-resistance or surrender states, the anterior cingulate cortex, the region tracking conflict, shows reduced strain. The amygdala's reactivity lowers and synchrony between brain hemispheres increases. You become quite literally more coherent. Your brain waves start to align in smoother, slower rhythms, similar to the harmonics that musicians reach when tuning an instrument perfectly. And with that coherence comes a distinct sensation: space. Thoughts have edges again. Sensations seem richer. You notice textures, light, sound, the very data your nervous system filtered out while busy forecasting disasters. The paradox of letting go is that by releasing mental control, you gain perceptual control. Your awareness becomes sharper because it's no longer distorted by tension. This is the beginning of what could be called neuroplastic surrender, a dynamic state where the brain reopens learning pathways that stress had locked. Under high tension, your nervous system prioritizes efficiency and defense, doing what's familiar, not what's intelligent. When relaxation enters, the hippocampus, the bridge between experience and memory, wakes up, allowing new connections to form. You literally regain access to possibilities that your fear-based circuits had silenced. Letting go, then, is not passive. It's an active reorganization. The neural architecture rebalances between top-down control and bottom-up sensing. Decision-making shifts from intellectual overdrive to embodied intelligence. Your gut, heart, and intuitive centers begin feeding accurate data again because the noise from overthinking has quieted. This inner silence is not empty. It's full of signal. The mind stops broadcasting static and begins receiving again. In quantum terms, if we borrow the metaphor, the observer collapses fewer unnecessary probabilities. Energy, once trapped in prediction, starts flowing toward perception. You become available to reality as it is, not as your mind demands it to be. There's also a biochemical symmetry at play. When the body perceives safety through relaxation, cortisol decreases and oxytocin rises. That hormonal balance feeds back into the nervous system, reinforcing openness and trust. Over time, this feedback loop strengthens neural pathways associated with calm responsiveness rather than reactive defense. The more you practice letting go, the easier it becomes for your system to return to coherence after disruption. You can even feel the shift as a subtle warmth in the chest, a loosening in the jaw, a widening of peripheral vision. These are physiological markers of alignment returning. And they're not just sensations, they're data points showing that your body-mind network is exiting survival mode and re-entering presence. But here's the fascinating twist. This neurophysiological reset is not yet the consciousness shift itself. It's the foundation for it. What happens next is something even subtler, a change not only in how your brain processes information, but in how your awareness interprets it. You begin to sense that perception itself has a frequency, and that frequency can be tuned. That's where the real threshold lies, beyond mere calmness, in the alignment between your internal coherence and the patterns of the world around you. The brain prepares the ground, but the consciousness that steps onto it is something larger, waiting quietly just beyond control. And it's at that edge, between neurological order and the unknown, that the deeper shift begins to reveal itself. There's a specific sound the mind makes when it's tense. You can't hear it with your ears, but you can feel it. The background static that hums beneath your thoughts when you're trying too hard. It's a form of cognitive interference, and it's the reason why even the most disciplined people find clarity slipping away the more they push for it. Tension isn't just emotional strain, it's a signal distortion across your entire neuroelectrical field. Every cell in your body communicates through subtle electromagnetic impulses, each neuron firing in rhythm with the next. When stress enters, that rhythm fragments. Brainwaves that once pulsed in harmony begin to spike out of sync, like instruments playing slightly off-tempo in an orchestra. The result is mental noise, not metaphorical, but measurable dissonance inside the nervous system. This internal noise alters perception. When your body is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, the amygdala hijacks your attentional systems, making your awareness fixate on potential threats, real or imagined. The higher cortical regions that normally handle creativity and foresight get sidelined. It's as if your consciousness is tuning into a radio station, but interference scrambles the signal. You catch fragments of intuition, flashes of insight, but they fade under the static of tension. And it's not only the mind that suffers. The body amplifies this distortion. Muscles contract, limiting blood flow, your diaphragm stiffens, cutting oxygen exchange, your heartbeat quickens, but loses coherence. The heart and brain, which usually communicate through rhythmic synchronization, fall out of sync. Heart rate variability, one of the most accurate indicators of inner balance, collapses. In that incoherence, the system wastes energy trying to correct itself, and fatigue creeps in disguised as effort. The irony is that most people mistake this tension for focus. They believe that strain equals productivity, that the furrowed brow proves engagement. But the brain doesn't interpret tension as focus. It interprets it as danger. It reallocates resources to survival circuits, narrowing awareness to the immediate and obvious. In that contraction, subtle information, emotional nuance, creative association, intuitive guidance, disappears from your conscious field. You're still thinking, but your thinking is noisy, repetitive, and incomplete. If you were to visualize your mind at that moment, it would look like a field of vibrating particles colliding with each other. In quantum physics, there's a concept called decoherence, the loss of orderly wave patterns when a system becomes disturbed. The same happens psychologically. Your attention loses coherence, your thoughts stop flowing and start scattering. You're no longer a single frequency of awareness, you're a cluster of competing ones. That's why tension feels like chaos inside the chest, like too many versions of you talking at once. Each thought competes for dominance, each worry demands validation, and in the crossfire, genuine perception gets drowned out. The signal of intuition, delicate, precise, easily masked, is the first casualty. You can't hear what reality is trying to show you because the internal noise floor is too high. Here's what's often missed. Internal noise doesn't just reflect your stress, it creates it. The more noise in your neural circuitry, the more fragmented your sense of self becomes. The boundaries between thoughts and sensations blur, and confusion arises. You stop knowing what you actually feel versus what you're afraid to feel. This is how people lose themselves inside their own minds. not through lack of intelligence, but through excess interference. There's a pattern beneath all of this. Tension disrupts the feedback loop between perception and action. When you're calm, your brain receives accurate data, adjusts behavior fluidly, and restores equilibrium. Under tension, feedback becomes delayed or distorted. You respond to what you think is happening, not what actually is. That delay compounds error, and the more you correct, the more distortion you create, a self-reinforcing cycle of mental static. But this isn't an irreversible state. The nervous system has a built-in noise cancellation mechanism, the capacity for rhythmic entrainment. When you shift attention from control to observation, your brain begins to recalibrate. Breathing slows, the heart regains coherence, and neural oscillations start resonating again. The static doesn't vanish all at once, it melts gradually, revealing signals that were always there. And here's the subtle threshold. As the noise subsides, a new kind of clarity emerges, not a thought, but a tone. You begin to hear your own awareness without interference. This clarity is fragile at first, easily lost when you reach for it too quickly, yet it marks the first measurable step towards something deeper, the point where perception begins to reorganize itself around stillness rather than effort. Because when the static fades, what remains isn't silence. It's pure information. And that's where the next transformation begins to unfold, in the calm frequency that appears right after the noise breaks. There's a moment, subtle, nearly invisible, when the mind stops tightening around what it wants to grasp. It doesn't happen through discipline, but through exhaustion of resistance. After the static of tension, the first micro-relief arises, not from solving anything, but from not needing to solve. The mind exhales, and in that exhale, a new form of perception begins to awaken. Attentional relaxation is not laziness, nor is it distraction. It is the conscious release of unnecessary effort, a quiet recalibration between awareness and focus. Imagine the difference between staring and seeing. When you stare, your vision narrows, your facial muscles freeze, and your energy condenses into a single rigid point. When you see, the gaze widens, softens, and suddenly detail returns. The same is true of mental focus. When attention relaxes, perception expands. Neurologically, this is a shift from sympathetic dominance to parasympathetic balance. The autonomic nervous system, which has been in high alert under tension, begins to send safety signals through the vagus nerve. Heart rate slows, blood pressure drops, breathing deepens, and brainwave patterns descend from fast beta into alpha, the rhythm of wakeful calm. In that frequency, neural communication becomes fluid again. The hemispheres start to synchronize, restoring the dialogue between logic and intuition that tension had severed. You can sense this recalibration in the body. Shoulders drop without permission. The stomach softens. The face warms slightly as blood returns to the skin. The mind, freed from micromanaging every variable, begins to listen again. Awareness detaches from the noise of thought and relocates into the present sensory field. You start noticing details that were always there. The texture of air, the faint pulse in your hands, the rhythm of your own breathing. That sensory widening is not trivial. It's the gateway to clarity. In a state of attentional relaxation, the default mode network remains quiet, while the salience network, the system that detects meaningful stimuli, starts to re-engage. The brain becomes selective again, but in a natural way. It filters noise without suppressing awareness. It's the difference between control and coherence. Control demands effort. Coherence restores order by resonance. The relief that follows is both mental and somatic. You can think more clearly because your body no longer feels like a battlefield. The energy once spent on vigilance becomes available for perception. And this is crucial, because what we call intuition or insight isn't something added to the mind. It's what emerges when interference fades. Relaxation doesn't dull attention. It purifies it. In that purification, something surprising occurs. Your sense of self begins to thin. The observer loosens its identity with the thinker. There's no deliberate meditation here. It's physiological. As the neural tension dissolves, self-referential activity diminishes. You stop narrating reality and start experiencing it directly. The distinction between subject and object softens, replaced by a quiet awareness that simply witnesses. For most people, this moment feels like coming home after a long mental storm. Not euphoric, not dramatic, just clear. The world regains dimension. Time slows down slightly, not because it changed, but because your perception stopped racing ahead of it. You find yourself acting with less hesitation, speaking with less premeditation. The space between impulse and response expands, and inside that space, intelligence reappears. From a quantum cognitive perspective, this is where observation starts influencing the system again. When attention relaxes, it stops collapsing probabilities prematurely. Possibilities remain open a little longer, giving your consciousness time to sense what fits, rather than what fears dictate. You begin to operate from resonance instead of reaction. The brain, now in rhythmic coherence, acts like a tuning fork aligning to subtler information fields. Not mystical fields, but the countless sensory and emotional cues your awareness can finally register again. It's here that a quiet revelation unfolds. Relaxation is not the opposite of focus. It is its foundation. The sharpest perception arises not from contraction, but from coherence. You can only see clearly when the observer stops trembling. And this attentional release doesn't merely calm the surface. It prepares the inner architecture for a deeper alignment still hidden ahead. Because once the nervous system experiences this first state of coherence, it begins to crave more of it. A subtler, forbidden kind of alignment that changes how your entire consciousness interacts with reality. That alignment waits just beyond this first taste of stillness, quietly calling the mind to explore what lies on the other side of relaxation. There's a state of awareness that most people never access, not because it's hidden, but because it requires a kind of inner honesty that feels almost dangerous. It's what could be called the forbidden alignment, a resonance between intention and relaxation so pure that it threatens the very idea of control. Most of us stop right before it happens. The mind senses the edge of surrender and retreats, mistaking openness for risk. But that edge is precisely where consciousness begins to reconfigure itself. The first taste of this alignment often arrives as unease. You've released enough tension to feel calm, but not enough to feel safe in that calm. Something in you still whispers, "If I stop holding it together, won't everything fall apart?" That voice is ancient, the echo of survival conditioning embedded in the nervous system. It believes that vigilance equals safety. Yet the forbidden alignment begins when vigilance no longer feels necessary. Imagine for a moment your consciousness as a finely tuned instrument, not metaphorically, but literally. Every thought, emotion, and heartbeat sends vibrational information through the body's electromagnetic field. When intention, the signal you emit, conflicts with physiology, the field you inhabit, interference arises. You might say you want peace, but if your body is tense, the signal becomes scrambled. The universe, or more accurately, the feedback mechanisms of reality, respond not to your words but to your coherence. That's why this alignment feels forbidden. It demands you become internally congruent. No more pretending calm while vibrating anxiety. No more masking control as surrender. The body knows when your intention carries tension. The brain registers it as dissonance, the prefrontal cortex trying to impose order while the limbic system resists. True alignment occurs when both systems harmonize. The will to act and the willingness to release become one continuous movement. Neuroscience offers a clue to this phenomenon. When you combine a clear intention with physiological relaxation, your neural oscillations begin to synchronize across hemispheres. The corpus callosum, the bridge between left and right brain, becomes a highway instead of a barrier. Logic and intuition, thought and sensation merge into a single flow of information. You stop operating as a divided consciousness. The brain's coherence mirrors the state of a quantum system collapsing into unity, multiple probabilities integrating into one elegant waveform. This is not about manifesting or forcing outcomes. It's about removing the internal noise that keeps you from perceiving what's already aligned. When you reach this forbidden coherence, your perception sharpens not through effort, but through absence of resistance, absence of conflict. You start noticing synchronicities not as supernatural events, but as the mind finally tuned to the frequency of cause and effect in real time. The external world begins to mirror the internal order. The reason few people sustain this state is that it strips away familiar identities. Without inner conflict, there's nothing to defend. Without tension, there's no drama to narrate. The ego, which thrives on friction, loses its footing. And yet, this is where your most intelligent consciousness begins to operate. In forbidden alignment, you don't abandon intention, you refine it until it carries no residue of fear. The act of wanting transforms into the act of allowing. You can sense this alignment through the simplest signals. The heartbeat feels rhythmic, breathing effortless, thoughts quieter yet precise. The body becomes transparent, almost as if awareness were shining through matter. Time stops fragmenting. You feel an uncanny precision in your choices, as if each small action were part of a choreography you don't need to design. That's because neurologically, the body and brain are now entrained to the same rhythm. But here lies the paradox that few dare to touch. When coherence deepens, attachment begins to dissolve. What once felt essential to your identity starts feeling optional. The mind resists this spaciousness. It wants something to cling to. Yet the deeper truth is that this letting go of attachment doesn't weaken desire, it purifies it. What remains is not passive surrender, but an alert serenity, capable of profound action without strain. And if there's a quiet call behind all of this, it's this one. Alignment begins when you stop forcing your life to move faster than your nervous system can handle. Let your body catch up with your intention. Let the field settle before you act. If this resonates, if you've ever sensed that moment where relaxation and purpose almost merge, leave a simple phrase in the comments as a way of anchoring it into your awareness. I choose coherence over control. And take a slow breath as you type it. That's how the forbidden alignment begins to move through you. Attachment is subtle. It doesn't always look like obsession or dependency. Sometimes it wears the disguise of responsibility, love, or ambition. But beneath every attachment lies a single thread of distortion. The unconscious belief that your well-being depends on the stability of something outside you. That belief, once accepted, begins to warp perception. You no longer see the world as it is. You see it as a set of conditions that must be controlled to preserve what you're attached to. Neurologically, attachment activates the brain's survival circuits. The amygdala, the emotional alarm center, pairs the object of attachment with safety. Whenever that object is threatened, even symbolically, your nervous system interprets it as danger. Cortisol spikes, adrenaline follows, and your body braces itself. The prefrontal cortex, which governs perspective and reasoning, loses access to nuance. You start processing reality through a narrow lens designed for protection, not perception. In this contracted state, consciousness collapses around what it fears to lose. Every thought becomes an orbit around that single gravitational point. The relationship, the outcome, the identity, the future you're trying to secure. You might call this focus, but in truth it's fixation. Your awareness, once vast and panoramic, becomes tunneled. The quantum field of possibilities you could once sense now feels reduced to one fragile thread, the thing you cannot bear to release. The distortion runs deeper than emotion. It alters how your brain predicts the world. When attachment takes hold, the predictive coding system, the mechanism through which your mind forecasts reality, begins to overfit. It filters incoming information to confirm the importance of the object of attachment, ignoring data that contradicts it. You start mistaking emotional relevance for truth. The more you want something to be stable, the more blind you become to the signals that it is not. This is why attachment breeds suffering even in abundance. You can have what you desire and still feel tense, because your nervous system no longer trusts reality to hold it. The attachment creates cognitive noise, a continuous hum of vigilance. You're no longer responding to the present moment, you're managing imaginary futures. And this management, this invisible labor of holding life together, is what drains the mind of clarity. From a neurophysiological angle, attachment mirrors addiction. Dopamine circuits, once designed to motivate exploration, begin to loop. The brain learns that the mere anticipation of the attached object releases pleasure. So it keeps seeking, grasping, checking. Each micro moment of satisfaction is followed by a drop, a withdrawal that demands another hit. The body oscillates between craving and relief, but never reaches rest. Spiritually, the mechanism is identical. Attachment distorts your energetic field, again not in mystical terms but in resonance terms. When emotion vibrates around fear of loss, coherence collapses. Your internal frequency becomes erratic. You send out mixed signals, desire coated with anxiety, intention wrapped in control. The universe, or the network of feedback loops you inhabit, mirrors that confusion back to you. Relationships feel tense, opportunities stall. The flow of synchronicity breaks down. This is the invisible price of clinging. It replaces participation with possession. You stop dancing with life and start gripping it. And what you grip, by the laws of attention, becomes smaller. Awareness that once could sense infinite patterns now funnels into maintenance mode. Checking, guarding, measuring. You think you're protecting what matters, but what's really happening is that consciousness itself is shrinking to fit the boundaries of fear. Yet even within this distortion lies a hidden intelligence. The body keeps signaling through unease, through the fatigue of hypervigilance, that something is misaligned. When you feel the ache of attachment, it's not punishment, it's feedback. The system is telling you that your energy has condensed too tightly around one outcome. The discomfort isn't an enemy. It's a compass pointing you back to expansion. And this realization is crucial. The suffering born from attachment isn't evidence of failure, but an invitation to remember your original state, the one before grasping began. Beneath the contraction, consciousness is always intact, waiting for space to reopen. The paradox, however, is that you cannot force detachment. The effort to detach is another form of control, another mask of the same distortion. What dissolves attachment is awareness itself, the capacity to witness your clinging without judgment until its energy unwinds naturally. As this unwinding begins, the system starts to recalibrate. Cortisol levels fall, the breath deepens, and perception widens. You begin to notice details that were once filtered out by the urgency to hold on. The mind grows quieter, not because it has found certainty, but because it has stopped negotiating with uncertainty. And this widening, this subtle expansion after contraction, marks the threshold of something extraordinary. When attachment loosens, space returns. And in that space, perception begins to expand beyond the limits of self-preservation, revealing a dimension of awareness that had always been waiting underneath the noise of need. That's where the next transformation begins, in the moment you realize that freedom was never the absence of desire, but the absence of distortion within it. There's a quiet, almost imperceptible shift that happens the moment you stop gripping life. The air feels lighter, sounds seem clearer, and thoughts lose their sharp edges. It isn't bliss, not yet. It's precision. When you let go, your perception reorganizes itself, and what was once invisible begins to surface. Letting go is not the same as detaching in the cold sense of the word. It's an active biological recalibration. When the nervous system exits the loop of control, it returns to its natural intelligence, a state of adaptive openness. Cortisol drops, the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system activates, and the entire architecture of attention changes. You're no longer scanning for threat, you're scanning for truth. The effect is almost immediate. You start noticing small things that feel strangely significant. A conversation that reveals more than its words, a coincidence that feels like choreography, a decision that suddenly seems obvious when moments ago it was impossible. This isn't luck, it's perception expanding beyond its contracted boundaries. The brain, free from survival interference, begins to operate in what neuroscientists call global workspace mode, where distant neural networks communicate across the hemispheres. You begin to integrate information rather than chase it. There's a kind of relief in realizing how much of your suffering came not from what you lacked, but from how narrow your field of awareness had become. Under tension, your mind filtered everything through the question, "Am I safe?" When you release that filter, a different kind of question emerges. What's actually here? That question is the gateway to expanded consciousness. You can feel this shift in your body as if it were a sense you'd forgotten how to use. The chest opens, breathing feels smoother, the shoulders feel weightless. But the true change happens in the subtler layers of perception, how you interpret what you perceive. The same events, the same environment, even the same people start appearing in higher resolution. You see nuance where before there was noise, opportunity where before there was only effort. What's happening inside the brain is a quiet revolution. As the prefrontal cortex relaxes its constant command over your attention, subcortical regions, those responsible for pattern recognition and intuitive processing, begin to activate. Alpha and theta waves synchronize, linking rational thought with subtle sensing. It's not mystical intuition, it's efficient cognition. Your awareness begins processing multiple data streams without the interference of judgment. In this expanded state, creativity re-emerges naturally. You begin connecting ideas across unrelated domains, sensing patterns before they crystallize into words. Decisions stop feeling forced because they no longer arise from fear of loss. Instead, they appear from coherence, the felt understanding of what fits into the unfolding order of your life. From a quantum perspective, it's as if the observer, you, has stepped back enough to allow more probabilities to remain accessible before collapsing into a single outcome. By not forcing, you allow the field of reality to communicate with you. You start noticing synchronicities not as random luck, but as feedback from the deeper structure of your awareness interacting with the external world. The micro-reward of letting go is this sense of gentle astonishment. You realize that life has been responding all along, but your tension had been muting the signal. Now perception feels almost holographic, each moment containing layers you can feel and interpret beyond language. Your consciousness isn't expanding outward into space, it's expanding inward into clarity. There's also a measurable physical echo. When perception widens, energy efficiency increases. Heart rate variability improves. The brain consumes less oxygen for the same cognitive tasks. You literally spend less energy to perceive more reality. This is why peace doesn't feel dull. It feels precise. The mind has stopped wasting energy fighting with what is. And the beauty of this shift is that it doesn't depend on external conditions. You don't need everything to fall into place for perception to expand. Expansion itself makes things fall into place. When you release resistance, coherence emerges, and the world starts to organize itself around your clarity. What was once a series of obstacles begins to look like a map. But this expanded perception is not yet the destination. It's the threshold. Because as awareness stretches, it reveals what had been hidden beneath all the mental static, a deeper contradiction still running the system. Even in this newfound spaciousness, subtle attachments linger. Emotional residues that keep fragments of your consciousness bound to old fears and old stories. And it's precisely when perception opens that these residues become visible. They rise to the surface like shadows emerging in softer light, showing you the exact frequency that still distorts your coherence. What happens next is not another collapse, but the next layer of transformation. The discovery that what truly blocks your flow isn't effort anymore, but the unhealed tension that still hides beneath the act of wanting. There's a moment, quiet and almost disorienting, when you realize that letting go was never about surrendering your goals. It was about tuning out the static that blocked your access to them. Most people confuse release with resignation, as if to let go meant to stop caring. But in truth, the act of letting go is a neurological and energetic recalibration. It doesn't erase your intention. It changes the frequency through which that intention communicates with reality. When you're forcing, your brain operates in high beta waves, fast, fragmented, reactive. It's the state of problem-solving under stress, where your attention narrows to a tunnel and your body burns through adrenaline. In that mode, every decision feels urgent, every delay feels threatening, and the world mirrors your own compression. You're broadcasting effort, not clarity. You're transmitting noise instead of signal. Letting go, on the other hand, alters that frequency completely. The brain begins to synchronize in lower, more harmonious rhythms, alpha and theta states. These frequencies are not about idleness, they're about integration. They allow your prefrontal cortex, limbic system, and sensory networks to operate in coherence, meaning your inner and outer perceptions finally match. You're no longer reacting to imagined threats, you're responding to actual data. The mind becomes an instrument that resonates with accuracy rather than interference. It's a radical shift because it changes your relationship with effort itself. In the high-frequency state of control, effort is resistance, a friction between what is and what you wish it to be. In the aligned state of letting go, effort becomes resonance, the natural expression of energy moving through you instead of against you. It's not that you stop acting, it's that action stops feeling like strain. The current carries you because you've tuned to its wavelength. What's fascinating is that this frequency shift can be measured. EEG scans show that when individuals enter meditative or flow states, moments of deep presence without attachment, brainwave coherence increases dramatically. Neural noise decreases and phase synchronization rises across multiple regions. This coherence doesn't just change how you think, it changes what you can perceive. Possibilities that were previously filtered out by anxiety now appear as viable options. The outer world seems to soften, but what's really happening is that your perception has become more fluid, more inclusive of subtle cues. You can feel this shift as a physical texture. Time slows, but not because it's dragging, it stretches, accommodating awareness in finer detail. You sense that thoughts have more space between them, emotions move cleanly through the body, and intuition arrives not as a whisper, but as a clear knowing. You haven't lost control, you've lost resistance. The frequency of consciousness has changed from contraction to coherence. The plot twist is that the universe itself, as described by quantum dynamics, behaves in much the same way. Systems with high noise are unstable and unpredictable. Systems in resonance settle into patterns of order. The same principle applies internally. When your mind releases its grip, coherence emerges spontaneously. What felt chaotic begins to align. The shift in mental frequency is the shift from observation distorted by fear to observation illuminated by presence. That's why letting go can feel both liberating and unnerving. You're stepping out of a familiar vibration, the hum of control, and into a quieter frequency that doesn't need to prove itself. The ego mistakes that quiet for emptiness, but it's not emptiness, it's bandwidth. It's the mind reclaiming the spectrum it lost to noise. This shift redefines power. True power is no longer the ability to force reality into your design, but the ability to remain attuned long enough for reality to reorganize around coherence. The frequency of your consciousness becomes the tuning fork that guides external patterns. Life begins to echo back your internal order, and that's when synchronicity stops being mystical and becomes practical, a predictable consequence of alignment between your mind's frequency and the environment's feedback loop. But something profound happens next. Once you've tasted this coherent frequency, you begin to notice how easily it can be disrupted by a single anxious thought, an old emotional reflex, a residue of attachment. Awareness sharpens enough to see the micro moments when your frequency drops, when contraction sneaks back in. And with that awareness, another layer of transformation begins. The realization that clarity isn't a state you achieve once. It's a rhythm you learn to sustain. And sustaining it requires more than calmness. It requires alignment between your intention and your physiology. That's where the deeper layer of this shift reveals itself. Coherence, not just as a brain state, but as a living connection between thought, heartbeat, and focus. Because once your mental frequency steadies, your entire system begins to tune toward one question, the one that defines the next stage of this transformation. What happens when intention and physiology finally move in the same rhythm? The secret that hid behind the idea of the forbidden alignment was never about mystery or privilege, it was about coherence. The human system, at its most advanced state, functions not through intensity, but through synchronization. The alignment you've been sensing, that delicate harmony between clarity and surrender, is the meeting point between intention and physiological relaxation. It's the moment when thought and biology stop working against each other and begin to move as one rhythm. Most people live with their inner frequencies out of phase. The mind runs on overdrive while the body vibrates in defense. You tell yourself to trust, but your pulse still races. You visualize calm, but your breath betrays you. This gap between what you intend and what your physiology communicates to the world is the very distortion that keeps consciousness fragmented. You cannot access expanded awareness while your body speaks the language of fear. The forbidden alignment becomes possible only when intention stops loading the system with tension. Biologically, this synchronization begins in the heart, not as metaphor, but as measurable coherence. The heart is more than a pump. It's a rhythmic regulator that sends electromagnetic information throughout the body. When the heart's rhythm is erratic, the brain receives dissonant data, reinforcing anxiety and confusion. But when you enter a state of cardiac coherence, when breathing and emotions settle into a steady rhythm, that information becomes ordered. The vagus nerve transmits signals of safety upward to the brain, allowing neural communication to synchronize. Your entire system begins to resonate in a single pattern of clarity. In that coherence, the mind quiets not because it's empty, but because it's finally aligned. The prefrontal cortex no longer needs to micromanage experience. The amygdala, no longer flooded by cortisol, relaxes its vigilance. Brain and heart oscillations start to mirror each other, a literal entrainment of frequencies between cognition and emotion. This is not poetic, it's quantifiable. Studies have shown that when intention and relaxation coexist, the body emits electromagnetic waves with coherent amplitude and steady phase. In practical terms, that means your consciousness becomes a stable signal. And what happens when the signal stabilizes? Perception expands again, but this time with direction. You don't just see more, you see more accurately. The external world begins to reflect your inner order. Decision-making becomes fluid because the system isn't burning energy correcting itself. You experience clarity not as a thought, but as a physiological state, a silent knowing that guides without friction. This alignment also changes the texture of your presence. People can feel it before they understand it. Your coherence influences the environment because human nervous systems subconsciously synchronize to nearby rhythms. A coherent heart field calms others. An incoherent one transmits agitation. This is why your energy can shift a room without a word. The forbidden alignment was forbidden only because few have learned to sustain it without collapsing back into tension. And yet it's simpler than it sounds. The mechanism is always the same, relaxed focus. When you hold an intention gently, without pushing, without grasping, the nervous system remains in parasympathetic dominance. The body interprets your desire not as demand but as participation. That subtle distinction transforms everything. The brain no longer floods the system with stress hormones. Instead, it integrates the intention into a coherent feedback loop. You are no longer trying to make reality obey. You are communicating with it through resonance. Think of it like tuning a string instrument. If you tighten the string too much, the tone sharpens into tension. If you loosen it completely, sound collapses into dullness. Alignment is the middle point, where vibration carries purity and projection. Your consciousness functions in the same way. The clarity of your intention determines the note. The relaxation of your body determines its resonance. When the two converge, the world responds to the harmony they produce. And here's the deeper implication. Coherence isn't static. It's dynamic, self-correcting, alive. It doesn't mean stillness without motion. It means movement without friction. Every breath becomes a recalibration between doing and being, between focus and surrender. The forbidden alignment, then, was never about secrecy. It was about readiness. The nervous system had to be stable enough to hold power without distorting it. This is the true architecture of expanded consciousness. Not an escape from the body, but a full inhabiting of it. When intention and physiology resonate, awareness expands not outward, but inward through every cell. The body itself becomes an instrument of perception, a living interface between consciousness and matter. And through that interface, something larger begins to move. Intelligence without effort, order without control. But coherence once reached introduces a new threshold. Because the moment your system becomes this synchronized, perception begins to deepen into another layer of awareness, one that doesn't just feel aligned, but begins to sense reality as an extension of itself. The next step isn't about alignment anymore. It's about the transformation that occurs when that coherence turns into presence so expanded it changes how you experience the world altogether. It begins almost silently, a widening in perception so subtle that you can't tell whether the world changed or you did. But something unmistakable unfolds. Time feels less linear, thought less heavy, and the air itself seems charged with intelligence. This is the consciousness shift. Not a mystical event, but a measurable reorganization of awareness. It's what happens when coherence, built slowly through relaxation and intention, reaches a critical threshold. At this point, the brain and body are no longer running separate programs. Electrical rhythms across your cortex synchronize with the cardiac field. Respiration aligns with neural oscillations. Attention moves through you without friction. It's a physiological symphony. Each part of your system, cognitive, emotional, energetic, begins resonating around a single organizing principle: presence. The sense of I as an isolated observer dissolves, not into nothingness, but into a broader field of intelligence that includes everything you perceive. The science of this shift is beginning to be understood. Studies on advanced meditators show that during sustained states of coherence, the brain exhibits what's called gamma synchrony, high-frequency waves that unify disparate regions into a single, integrated pattern. In these moments, perception accelerates, comprehension expands, and the boundary between inner and outer experience becomes porous. It's as though the nervous system starts operating at a higher resolution, processing multiple layers of reality simultaneously. You aren't spacing out, you're tuning into a wider bandwidth of existence. In this heightened state, energy distribution throughout the body changes. The prefrontal cortex, once overloaded with control tasks, releases its grip, allowing sensory networks to integrate data with unprecedented speed. The default mode network, which keeps your identity narrative alive, quiets down. The chatter of self-consciousness fades, replaced by a luminous stillness. Paradoxically, you feel more like yourself than ever before, not the small, managing self, but the witnessing intelligence that animates it. This shift doesn't feel like ecstasy. It feels like precision. Reality sharpens. Every sound, texture, and movement appears in perfect timing, as if existence were orchestrated from within you. Emotion transforms from reaction into resonance, no longer turbulence but communication. You begin to sense what physicists describe as coherence between systems, the feeling that your internal order is mirrored by the external world. Events unfold with a kind of elegance that logic alone can't explain. You stop chasing synchronicities because you've become one. The quantum analogy is unavoidable here. In physics, when a system transitions from chaos to order, it doesn't do so gradually, it jumps. Energy reorganizes instantaneously into a new stable state. Consciousness behaves in the same way. After enough micro-adjustments of attention, there comes a tipping point. The mind stops fragmenting reality into pieces and experiences it as one field, not metaphorically but experientially. You no longer observe life. You participate in its unfolding from the inside. In this state, choice itself transforms. Decisions aren't manufactured through analysis. They arise spontaneously from clarity. You act without overthinking, because your actions are now extensions of perception. The future stops being a distant projection. It becomes a living field of probabilities that your awareness can navigate. You notice that what you once called intuition is simply perception unobstructed by fear. The brain's predictive mechanisms, freed from defensive bias, begin mapping possibilities rather than problems. There's also a profound shift in how energy feels. Instead of being consumed by thought loops or emotional turbulence, energy flows vertically, from the base of your body through the heart, into the mind, and outward again. This vertical integration gives rise to a feeling of grounded vastness. You are simultaneously rooted and expanded, intimate with the moment yet aware of its infinite dimensions. Nothing external has changed, yet your interaction with everything has. This expanded presence is the true nature of the consciousness shift. It's the moment when awareness stops orbiting around identity and begins functioning as pure intelligence, observing, creating, and receiving as one continuous act. You realize that clarity isn't something you reach, it's the default state revealed when interference fades. And yet, even in this expansion, a subtle challenge appears. The nervous system, now operating at higher sensitivity, begins to detect micro-fluctuations, moments when old patterns attempt to reassert control. The invitation is no longer to seek stillness, but to maintain coherence amidst movement. This is where mastery begins, holding expanded presence not only in meditation or quiet reflection, but in the motion of life itself. Because the true test of this consciousness shift isn't found in transcendence, it's found in return. When you bring this heightened awareness back into the noise of daily existence, something remarkable happens. The same world that once triggered tension now becomes the training ground for coherence in motion, and within that motion lies the next unfolding, the integration of expansion into everyday reality, where the outer and inner finally begin to move as one. Letting go doesn't pull you away from what you want, it brings you closer. The shift happens when tension gives way to clarity, when control dissolves into coherence. What once felt like effort becomes flow, and what once felt uncertain begins to move in rhythm with your awareness. The consciousness shift isn't about escaping the world, but perceiving it from a higher frequency, one where calm and intelligence act as one. If you felt that subtle expansion, that quiet realization that clarity begins where resistance ends, type "I'm tuned in the comments, so I'll know you made it to the end. And if this exploration resonated with you, choose one of the videos now appearing on your screen. Watch the one that calls to you next. It will take you deeper into this field of awareness, where letting go becomes your most powerful form of creation.